They said it was just bones in the dirt, nothing to chase. But I knew better. The wristwatch, the key, the way the body was reburied. Someone wanted him to be found. And what I uncovered next didn't just rewrite an old case. It exposed the truth they'd spent decades burying alive. The call came in just after 6 a.m., too early for trouble, too late to ignore. Riverside Park, North End. A jogger had tripped over something in the soil that didn't belong. Thought it was driftwood at first, then realized driftwood doesn't wear wristwatches. I got there just after sunrise. The light was soft, golden, the kind that makes the city look honest. But the dirt told a different story. He was barely buried. That was the first red flag. Whoever put him there wanted him to be found, just not too soon. A skeleton, mostly intact. No clothing, no wallet, no sign of trauma on what was left, but the wristwatch clung to the bone like it hadn't forgotten. Rusted, frozen in place. And then there was the key. It was tied around the ankle with an old shoelace, knotted tight, but not professional. Homemade, desperate. The kind of thing you do when you're afraid you'll lose it, or afraid someone else will take it. Brass, worn smooth. No markings, no brand, just a single, unassuming piece of metal that felt heavier than anything else in that field. Uniforms were already taping off the area, trying to keep the morning runners and dog walkers from snapping photos. But I could see it in their faces. They knew this wasn't random. You don't bury a body in one of the busiest parks in Manhattan unless you want someone to find it. Not hide it, not destroy it. Find it. I squatted beside the skull. It was tilted slightly, like it had been placed, not dropped. The soil around the bones had been disturbed recently. Fresher dirt on top, uneven pressure. Someone dug him up and reburied him. Which meant this wasn't just an old crime. This was a message. Or a mistake. The ME said we'd need time for dating, but I didn't need carbon-14 to tell me this wasn't new. The way the bones settled, the state of the watch, the key's corrosion. We were looking at something from the late 80s, maybe early 90s. And yet, here it was. Surfaced now. In the quiet hour before the city opens its eyes. I stood up, scanned the tree line. Nothing. No drag marks. No tools left behind. Whoever did this was clean, experienced maybe, or just lucky. But the feeling in my gut said it was more than luck. It was intention. I've seen a lot of ways bodies get left behind, dumped, burned, buried, and forgotten. But this one didn't feel like any of those. This one felt like a breadcrumb, like someone had been waiting for the city to catch up. I looked down at the key again, small, plain. But it had stayed with him all this time, through dirt, decay, weather, and now it was in my hands. Something told me it was going to unlock more than a door. The forensics report came in 2 days later. Male, late 20s, maybe early 30s at time of death. White. No dental records yet, but the jaw was intact enough to work with. The watch gave us a window, an old military-style piece, mass-issued until the mid-80s. The wear on the metal, combined with the bone structure, narrowed the estimate. Death likely occurred sometime around 1989, give or take a year. Blunt force trauma to the skull, back left quadrant, no exit wound, no bullet. This was up close, personal, not a beating, just one hit, precise, efficient, the kind of blow that ends things fast. The kind of thing you see in quiet killings, not brawls. The ME called it a kill with intent. That phrase stuck with me. What didn't make sense was the soil. The original burial was shallow, less than a foot deep. But what really caught my attention was the layering. There were 2 different densities of sediment, one compacted, one loose. The bones had shifted slightly within the cavity, as if they'd been moved, then returned. The roots had wrapped around some bones, but not all. The wrist bones were clean, too clean. Someone had dug him up, and not recently, not last week, months ago, maybe longer. Which begged the question, why rebury him at all? You dig up a body to move it, to hide it better, to destroy it. But this one was still here, still whole, just brought back, like a book pulled off a shelf, read, and put back in place. Almost exactly where you found it. Almost. That was the part that chilled me. There's something deeply wrong about a body that returns to the earth twice. The first time is usually done in haste. panic. But the second? That's done with thought, with hands that know what they're doing. Someone took their time, placed him back under the dirt, then covered it up just enough for nature to do the rest. Except nature didn't. The rain that week had washed off the top layer of soil. A shift in the ground, a crack maybe, brought one wrist just high enough for the metal to glint in the morning light. That's all it took. A jogger with good shoes and bad luck. That's how this started. I kept staring at the key. Still no clue where it fit. Not residential, not a lockbox. And the shoelace? Filthy, frayed, but not rotted through. Which meant it had been exposed recently. Another sign that someone went back. This wasn't just about finding a killer. This was about finding whoever unearthed the truth and quietly tried to bury it again. Maybe they changed their mind. Maybe guilt got the better of them. Or maybe they thought no one would notice. But the ground always notices. And now, so did I. I kept the key on my desk longer than I should have. Just sat there, next to my coffee, catching light it didn't deserve. It was nothing on the surface, unmarked, brass, ground smooth by time or fingers or maybe guilt. But the weight of it kept pressing. Too deliberate, too personal. You don't tie a key to your ankle unless you're afraid someone will take it, or unless it's the only thing you have left to hide. I ran it through the usual checks. Housing authority, standard lock manufacturers, city records. Nothing. No serial, no filing. Not a mail key, not a building front. It didn't match any known templates from residential sets issued after the 80s. So I took it where the databases don't go. On the edge of Canal and Mercer, there's a locksmith who still uses paper ledgers and swears the city died the day they installed digital meters. Name's Lou. 82. Maybe older if you count from the scowl. His shop smells like rust and ghosted intentions. Tools older than I am hang on pegboard walls, untouched since Reagan was in office. He was in the back fixing a deadbolt when I walked in. Didn't turn around when I said his name. Just waved me over with a wrench still in hand. I set the key on the counter. Said nothing. He looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, then looked away like he hadn't. Like it was just another bad copy job from a hardware store kid with shaky hands. But I saw the change. Just in his eyes, that half-second flicker when something old wakes up in a man and he's not sure he wants it back. "You cut this?" I asked. "No," he muttered, "but you've seen it." He didn't answer, just reached under the counter and pulled out a magnifying glass older than my badge, held the key up to the light, turned it in slow circles, then set it down, almost careful. "Custom job," he said. "Not mine, but familiar." "From where?" "Not a house key, not a mailbox. That's a restricted cut. Security grade. You'd need a special blank and the right grinder pattern. That profile, it's not civilian." He walked to the back, rummaged through a drawer, then came back with a binder wrapped in twine. He opened it slowly, flipping through yellowing pages with graphite rubbings of hundreds of key types. He stopped near the middle. "This one," he said, pointing to a rubbed-in outline that almost matched. "Close, not exact. But it's the same family." "What's it for?" He looked up at me then. Something behind the eyes that didn't want to be part of this. Basement locks, old city buildings, utility access, maybe storage. Not just anyone had these made. You had to know someone. Know who? People who didn't want to be remembered. I left with the key in my coat pocket and his words stuck in my head like rusted teeth. This wasn't a key to a home. It was a key to something someone tried very hard to lock away. The building wasn't supposed to be there. According to city records, it had been slated for demolition in '94 after a fire gutted the 3rd floor. Budget cuts, legal holdups, ownership disputes. Every excuse in the book had kept it upright. But still, it stood. Cracked brick, shattered windows. The kind of place the wind passes through like it's trying to clean out the memory. 101st Street, just west of Amsterdam. A dead building in a city that doesn't waste space. You walk past it now and you don't even see it. Just another ghost on a block full of them. I went around back. The key felt cold, even in my glove. It slipped into the rusted lock like it belonged. No resistance, no catch, just a quiet click. One of those quiet sounds that somehow cuts louder than a siren. The door opened into darkness. No power, no fixtures, just light bleeding through cracks in boarded windows and a few shafts of morning sun slipping between the floorboards above. Inside was every shade of ruin, peeling walls, scorched beams, floors littered with beer cans and spray paint tags. It reeked of old urine, burnt insulation, and something else. Something stale and sick that clung low to the ground. The stairs to the basement looked like they'd collapse under a feather. I tested them with my boot. They groaned, but held. One step at a time, I dropped down into the dark. Basements have their own kind of quiet, not like the hush of a library or the stillness of a church. This was dead air. No echo, no feedback. Like sound didn't want to live down there. I clicked on my flashlight. Dust floated like ash in the beam. A rusted boiler hunched in one corner, long out of use. Metal shelves lined the walls, mostly empty. Mold on the drywall, old newspapers turned to paste on the floor. Whoever used this place didn't do it for comfort, but there was one thing that didn't belong. Tucked behind a knocked-over shelf was a metal box, square, heavy, about the size of a carry-on suitcase. It was nailed shut, not locked, nails driven in haphazardly like someone didn't care how it looked, just that it stayed closed. I crouched down and brushed the dust off the lid. The metal was old, stained but intact. No markings, no tags. But the corners were reinforced and the nails were clean, newer than the box itself. Someone had sealed it recently. I looked around. No drag marks, no footprints in the dust. Just this thing, waiting. Like it had been placed here not to hide, but to wait for someone who knew what to look for. I took out my pocket pry bar, slid it under the edge. The first nail screamed, the second cracked. Then the lid gave. Inside was a secret no one meant to find. The lid came off with a soft groan of metal and memory. I braced for something worse, bones maybe, blood-stained rags, a note scrawled in panic. But what I found was colder than any of that. More careful. Inside the box were 6 small objects, each tucked into its own makeshift compartment like they were meant to be remembered in order. I pulled out the first, a roll of undeveloped film, 35 mm, still sealed in a plastic canister, then another, and another. 6 in total, all labeled only with numbers, handwritten in black marker, 1 through 6, no names, no dates. Next was a badge. NYPD, cracked straight through the middle, number 5471, the kind of fracture you don't get from a fall. This was deliberate. Clean break down the center like someone needed it to stop meaning what it used to. It had been wrapped in a torn handkerchief, as if whoever placed it there didn't want to touch it directly. I held it for a moment, felt the weight of it, heavy for its size. That badge had seen things, maybe caused them. And then there was the newspaper clipping, folded twice. Yellowed at the edges, brittle to the touch. I unfolded it carefully. The Village Voice, July 10th, 1989. The headline hit like a gut punch. Activist leader missing after protest turns violent. Beneath it was a black and white photo. Grainy, chaotic, people mid-sprint, signs in the air. And circled in red pen just below the second paragraph was a name. Stanley Price. I didn't recognize it at first, but the more I read, the more the shape of the story started to form. A protest against a city-backed land deal. Something about environmental zoning, private developers, and a stretch of waterfront property being flipped under the radar. Stanley was listed as the face of the resistance. Former teacher, community organizer. Last seen leading chants outside a barricade before the police moved in. The article was written like he disappeared mid-sentence. One moment a leader with a bullhorn, the next a rumor. No body, no arrest, no official explanation. Just a line about unconfirmed injuries and ongoing investigations. But I'd seen this story before. Different name, different decade. The kind of story the city lets drift into memory because solving it would mean admitting it never tried. I looked back at the badge. Someone wanted me to see this. This box wasn't hidden. It was planted. Like a message. Like a hand reaching up through 30 years of silence and hoping someone would still care enough to answer. Stanley Price didn't vanish. He was taken. And someone wanted me to finally hear him. Most people forgot the protest even happened. July 1989, just another hot summer week in a city that churns through outrage like weather. But protests leave traces, especially the ones the city doesn't want you to remember. The official line called it an unresolved disturbance. That phrase again. Always the same when they don't want to say riot or brutality or cover-up. Just noise that got a little too loud. Then went quiet again. The newspaper clipping from the box gave me a date, but the deeper I dug, the thinner the trail became. No televised coverage, no court transcripts, a few scattered editorials in fringe outlets, more questions than facts. But there was one constant, a name that kept surfacing and then vanishing again. Stanley Price. I pulled every archived mention I could find. Before 1989, he was everywhere, teaching history in the Bronx, organizing free lunch drives, petitioning zoning boards, clean record, smart, loud. The kind of man who didn't just ask questions, he made you uncomfortable with the answers. His cause was simple. A proposed land development deal down by the East River that would have raised several low-income housing blocks and turned them into commercial waterfront space. He fought it hard, called it what it was, a city-sanctioned eviction wrapped in fancy language. Then came the rally, July 7th, 1989. Roughly 300 people gathered outside a fenced-off lot on South Street. Banners, megaphones, music. It started peaceful. But by the time the sun dropped, arrests were being made. Some for trespassing, some for resisting, some just for being loud. And Stanley, he disappeared. No booking record, no hospital report, no confirmed sighting after 6:45 p.m., when he was last seen standing on top of a milk crate yelling into a bullhorn. Witnesses said plainclothes cops started showing up. Aggressive, no badges, no names, just force. A few people claimed they saw Stanley pulled into an unmarked van. Others said he slipped away, afraid of being made into an example. But the official file, one page, redacted. No investigative notes, no follow-ups, just a single line. Subject presumed missing, no further action at this time. It wasn't just a cold case, it was a silenced one. I found one photo buried in the city archive, a wide-angle shot of the crowd from a nearby rooftop, grainy and overexposed. But if you zoom in enough, dead center, you see him, Stanley. Hands raised, mouth open mid-chant, facing the crowd like he still believed they could win. And behind him, someone watching. Not a protester, not NYPD, a man in a suit with no sign, no slogan, just stillness. Eyes locked on Stanley like he wasn't there to protest, he was there to vanish. Most people moved on after that week. The protest fizzled, the land was sold, the buildings went up, and the city got what it wanted, progress. But the skeleton in the park said otherwise. Stanley Price didn't move on. He was moved. Her name was Janice Price. Lived alone in a walk-up in Bed-Stuy, same apartment she and Stanley grew up in. The buzzer was broken, so I knocked the old-fashioned way. Twice, hard enough to be heard, soft enough not to feel like a threat. She opened the door halfway, the chain still on. "You with the department?" she asked. "I'm not here to reopen anything that doesn't want to be," I said. "I just need to ask about your brother." The chain slid back. She hadn't heard that name, Stanley, spoken by a stranger in over 30 years. You could see it in her face. That quiet pause where the mind opens a door it nailed shut decades ago. "Come in," she said, "but don't expect coffee. I don't make it for ghosts." The apartment was clean, lived in. Plastic covers on the couch yellowed at the edges. The kind of place where the furniture doesn't move anymore. Family photos lined the hallway, but none of Stanley. Not until she pulled one from a drawer. Black and white, slightly bent. Him in a checkered coat, holding a book like it was a shield. "He wasn't just smart," she said. "He was driven. Always felt like the world needed fixing and no one else was willing to bleed for it." I asked her when she last saw him. "The day of the protest," she said without hesitation. He kissed my cheek and said, "If I come back tired, don't wake me. Let me sleep." And then he smiled. That kind of smile people wear when they know something's coming. She paused there. He didn't come back. She never filed a report herself, said she tried. Was told one already existed. When she asked for a copy, she got a number. When she followed up, they said it was in process. After that, no one returned her calls. He was being watched, she said. Not just followed, watched, all the time. He used to say things like, If they come for me, check the windows. I thought he was being dramatic. Then I found footprints on the fire escape, twice. I didn't ask who they were, because I already had a list of possibilities in my head. He believed in something bigger, she continued. People think that means God or country. For him, it was justice, fairness, truth. She looked down at the photo. But truth doesn't protect you when you're poor and loud in New York. I showed her the clipping. She touched the ink like it might smudge. That's the only time the city said his name after he vanished, she whispered. Just once. And then never again. She stood up, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a shoebox. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all from Stanley, written before the protest, rambling, passionate, dense with ideas. One line in particular caught my eye, scrawled in the margin of a half-finished thought. If anything happens, it won't be random. Remember that. I looked up at her. She nodded like she already knew the question. Yes, she said. I think they killed him. And then softer. But I think someone helped them forget he ever existed. I left with the photo, one of the letters, and the heavy kind of silence you don't shake off after the door closes. Some ghosts don't want justice. They just want someone to remember their name. I've seen redacted files before. Most of them are sloppy, lines blacked out with thick Sharpie strokes over names someone forgot to clear. But Stanley's file wasn't redacted. It was dismantled, intentionally. The kind of file that used to have weight, now reduced to a few skeletal pages clinging to a paperclip like survivors of a fire. Basic details: name, date of birth, occupation, last known address. That was it. No photos, no incident report, no list of contacts, no medical notes, and most telling of all, no coroner's entry, which meant no body was ever found. But I knew better. The body had been found, 30 years late, dug up and quietly returned to the dirt like a secret no one wanted to finish telling. I flagged the missing items and put in a request to review the incident notes from July 1989. Just a formality. I already knew what the answer would be. But I didn't expect the bounce-back message. Restricted access. Refer to Intelligence Division. That's not standard language. You don't route domestic protest reports to intelligence unless someone's watching more than just a crowd. It's what they do for organized threats, subversive groups, internal tracking of people who talk too loud, gather too often, or make the wrong kind of sense to the wrong kind of audience. Stanley Price had made a list, and someone made sure he never got off it. I tried to contact an old friend who used to work in records. She didn't return my call. The next day, she emailed, "Don't push this one, Mike. They still remember." They. That word again. The invisible ownership of silence. I walked down to the city archive in person. The clerk at the desk flipped through the microfiche logs like he already knew I wouldn't find what I was looking for. Said that summer had gaps, that not everything got digitized, that sometimes things just go missing. I've seen a lot of things go missing. Evidence, witnesses, tape reels, the truth. It doesn't vanish. It gets buried under paperwork and fatigue and just enough time that the people who remember stop talking out loud. But the key was still in my pocket. The badge, the film, the body in the park. Stanley wasn't a conspiracy theory. He was a man. A man who raised his voice once too often and disappeared without a headline to hold his place. And now, someone didn't want that voice raised again. The further I pushed, the more doors creaked open just wide enough to warn me. Not slam, not threaten, just warn. That quiet pressure. The kind that doesn't come from a phone call. It comes from absence. From files that should be there and aren't. From colleagues who don't answer. From rooms that go silent when you walk in. This wasn't just forgotten. It was erased. And whoever erased it wanted to make sure the next person stopped before the rest of the story surfaced. But I'd already found the bones. Now I wanted the rest. It was roll number 4. I had the film developed at a backroom shop in the East Village, one of those places that pretends it's still 1978 just to keep the ghosts feeling welcome. No questions asked, just cash and a nod. 2 hours later, I had contact sheets in hand. Grainy, stark. Frame after frame of the 1989 protest. And then scrawled in the emulsion at the edge of one strip, barely legible under a loop, 3 characters, D. Lasher. At first I thought it was a tag, maybe a timestamp glitch. But when I held it up to the light again, I saw the etching wasn't machine cut. It was done by hand, scratched in with something sharp before the roll was ever loaded into the camera. A signature. D. Lasher. The name lit something in the back of my brain, familiar, but just out of reach. I ran it through old media databases. Nothing current, no social, no recent credits. But back in the 80s, he was everywhere. A street shooter with a gift for being in the wrong place at the exact right time. Freelanced for the Village Voice, Soho Weekly, even some national syndicates. But his specialty was heat. Disappeared activists, union busts, cops out of uniform, urban rot. The photos weren't beautiful. They were confrontational, shaky, overexposed, but real. The kind of real that made editors nervous. He never went mainstream, never wanted to. He stayed in the margins. Then, one day, gone. No obituary, no retirement post, just silence. Some said he moved west. Others said he got scared after a break-in at his studio. Nothing taken, just his negatives trashed. There were rumors of a box of undeveloped rolls hidden somewhere in Alphabet City, but no one ever found them, until now. Roll 4 told its own story. Wide shots of the protest, sure, but then tighter frames. Faces in the crowd. Stanley, mid-sentence. A man in plain clothes standing behind him, not yelling, not moving, just watching. And in one photo, the 6th frame, you could see something else. A badge. Not worn, not displayed. Just the glint of it in the man's palm as he adjusted his coat. I checked the angle. If Lasher caught that moment, he wasn't standing with the crowd. He was behind them, embedded, which meant two things. 1, he knew what he was looking for. 2, he knew someone didn't want it seen. If this was Lasher's film, and Stanley ended up dead days after it was taken, then maybe Lasher wasn't just a witness. Maybe he was the last person Stanley trusted. Or the last person to see what happened before the lights went out. I ran his name through missing persons. Nothing. But the NYPD had a silent file tagged to it. Internal marker only, no details. Just a note dated November 1990. Do not pursue. Source compromised. That wasn't a photographer. That was a problem someone wanted to forget. But they didn't destroy his film. And now I had it. He left a trace, which means he left something else behind. I just had to find it, before someone else made sure I disappeared too. The film came back in strips. 6 rolls, all black and white, all hand-shot. The kind of grain you can't fake with filters, dirt in the teeth kind of images. You could feel the tension bleeding through the negatives before the first light even hit the scanner. I laid them out under a lamp in the back of the precinct, away from the noise. Sometimes silence helps you see what the noise hides. The first few frames were standard protest stuff. Banners, chants, raised fists, sweat. July '89 in Manhattan boiling over. Stanley was in the thick of it. Megaphone in one hand, city zoning documents in the other. Caught mid-yell, but there was a calm in his face. He believed what he was saying. Even as the crowd started to shift, even as the energy went from focused to fractured, he held the line. Then came frame 18. Stanley. Closer now. The angle changed. This wasn't taken from the crowd. It was behind him, someone following, documenting. He was off the milk crate, walking toward the edge of the lot, eyes narrowed like he'd spotted something the rest of them hadn't. And behind him, 2 men. No signs, no slogans, plain clothes. One wore a short-sleeved dress shirt. The other wore a jacket. I zoomed in. It wasn't the face that got me. It was the wrist. On the man's left hand, just below the cuff, something metal, reflective, a watch. I enhanced the scan, compared it to the item recovered from the skeleton in Riverside Park. The same thick bezel, same squared lugs, same military-style band, rubber cracked near the face from age or sun. It was a match, which meant one of the men cornering Stanley that day ended up in the dirt. Or he was already there. The next few frames told a different story. Stanley backing up. One of the men steps closer. The second's arm reaches out, not violently, not yet, but firm, like someone trying to end a conversation before it starts. And Stanley. He looks over his shoulder, toward the camera, toward the photographer, toward whoever was capturing this moment. And the look on his face? It wasn't fear. It was recognition. That shook me more than anything. He knew what was happening. Maybe not the outcome, but the setup. You could see it in his eyes, the resignation of a man who knew the city would never protect him, and the silence already on its way. The final frame was empty, blurry, motion caught. The kind of image you get when the photographer stops focusing on the subject and starts focusing on survival. Lasher had captured something real, too real, and someone made sure that film never saw daylight. Until now. I had a corpse with a matching watch, a missing photographer, and a man who vanished the day he looked straight into a lens and tried to warn the future. The city called it a protest. But the film? It saw something else. It saw a quiet abduction in broad daylight, and no one stopped it. I ran the badge number through the department archive the second I got back to the precinct. Took a little digging. It was an old format, pre-95 switch. But the system finally coughed up a match. Eli Brandt, NYPD Internal Affairs, assigned 1985 to 1991. Clean record on paper, commendations, promotions, standard commendable service language that doesn't say anything real. Officially retired after a non-critical medical event. No scandal, no headlines, just gone. But the deeper I looked, the less clean it got. There was a memo buried in the back pages of his personnel file, misfiled or maybe just forgotten. Dated February 1991. Subject: Field conduct concern, unconfirmed reports of unscheduled civilian surveillance. No specifics, no names, no follow-up. Just departmental shorthand for something that smelled like off-the-books work. Internal Affairs is supposed to police the police. But Brandt? He was watching civilians, protesters, community leaders, groups labeled agitators in red ink, code for people who embarrassed the city just by existing out loud. Stanley's name wasn't in the memo, but I didn't need it to be. The dates lined up, the protest, the film, the broken badge wrapped like a wound in that box under the floorboards. Someone wanted to erase Brandt's involvement but couldn't quite bring themselves to toss the proof. Maybe guilt, maybe leverage. I checked his retirement paperwork, listed a mailing address in Yonkers. It was a dead end. That building was demolished in '98. No forwarding info. No tax records under his name since 2003. The kind of vanishing act you don't get without help. But I wasn't looking for where he was now. I wanted to know what he was back then. I called in a favor, an old buddy who works cold cases and never fully let go of his paranoia. He pulled an internal log from a forgotten incident file. Brandt had been seen in the vicinity of 2 other protests in the late '80s, always alone, never in uniform, always with a camera. That's when it clicked. The surveillance wasn't just verbal or visual, it was photographic. Brandt documented people, their faces, their habits, their routines, built dossiers, not officially, not for the DA, for someone else, or maybe just for himself. A hobby with a badge and no boundaries, and now, 30 years later, his badge was cracked in half and buried in a metal box beside a dead man and 6 undeveloped rolls of film. You don't do that by accident. You do it when something breaks, your trust, your orders, your nerve. Whatever Brandt was doing, it wasn't sanctioned. And someone made sure the only evidence left behind was broken, buried, and nearly lost. But it wasn't, because I had the badge now. And a man like Eli Brandt doesn't just retire. He disappears when the wrong person starts asking questions. And now, that person was me. The name came up once, in a scanned briefing memo from 1987. Right there, second paragraph. Detective Eli Brandt and his assigned partner Norman Kell will assist in field surveillance and intake. After that, nothing. Kell's name disappeared from every official record. No retirement notice, no disciplinary action, no transfer. It was like someone tore him out of the department with surgical precision and then lit the paper trail on fire. That's not common. You don't wipe a name unless that name did something no one once remembered. But one address survived, tied to an old utility bill from 1992, a brownstone in the East 60s, rent-controlled, once owned by a cousin with a quiet paper trail. The building was long gone, flattened for condos. But memory? That doesn't always demolish so easily. I found a neighbor. Retired doorman, lived across the street since '76. Still wore the old cap like he was waiting for someone important to walk by. I showed him a faded ID photo I'd stitched together using what little was left in the archives. He didn't even blink. "Norman Kell," he said. Just like that. I asked him what he remembered. Tall, polished. Talked like he was doing you a favor just by listening. Always carried himself like he belonged in a better movie. Charismatic, sure. But there was something off about him, like he was always pretending to be something he wasn't. Did he live alone? Far as I know, came and went at strange hours. Sometimes he'd be in a suit, clean-shaven. Sometimes jeans and sunglasses, middle of the night. But never looked rushed, never out of control. Ever see him with anyone? The doorman nodded. Once or twice. A few men. All looked like they came from the same catalog. Serious eyes, short hair, shoes too clean. One guy used to bring him folders, like actual manila folders. They'd talk on the stoop. Kel would smile the whole time, nodding. But his eyes didn't smile. I pressed for more. You know the kind of man you don't want to say no to, even when he's asking you how your day's going? He said. That was Kel. You say good morning. And it feels like a lie. He told me Kel disappeared overnight. One day there were regular comings and goings. Next day, nothing. Mail piled up. Lease went dark. The place stayed empty for months before someone else moved in. You think he was a cop? He asked me. I nodded slowly. Once. The old man spat into the street. Then I don't want to know anything else. I didn't blame him. Men like Kel didn't just walk away. They were walked away by someone higher up with the kind of influence that doesn't use ink. Kel wasn't just Brant's partner. He was the part of the story that got buried deeper. And something told me he wasn't buried with the rest of them. Because men like Kel, they don't die, they wait. It took 3 phone calls, 2 favors, and 1 stubborn cup of lukewarm diner coffee to finally get him to meet me. Name was Arturo, 83, former janitor of the 101st Street building, the one the city pretended stopped mattering in '94. Said he didn't like cops. Said he liked silence even less. We met on a bench just 2 blocks from where the building used to cast its long shadow. He wore a windbreaker zipped too high, hands knotted over a cane that looked more ceremonial than necessary. When I mentioned Stanley's name, he flinched like it echoed louder than it should have. I didn't know him, he said, but I saw him. I let the silence fill in the space he didn't want to. It was summer, he said finally. Hot, no wind, around midnight. Maybe later. I was sweeping out the front hallway. The elevator hadn't worked in 2 years, so no one came through the lobby unless they wanted to be seen. What did you see? 2 men, dragging someone. Young guy, medium build. Looked like he'd been in a fight, or maybe just out of breath from losing one. He wasn't kicking, but he wasn't walking either. Alive? Arturo nodded once. But scared. That kind of fear where the body's too tired to scream anymore. His eyes were wide like he thought someone would help, but nobody was around. Just me. And I didn't move. I didn't ask him why. I didn't have to. The way his voice cracked around the edges already told me. They didn't use the front stairs, he added. Went through the basement door. One of them had a key, like it was normal. I showed him the photo. Stanley, mid-speech, the energy of protest still burning behind his eyes. He looked down, then slowly nodded. Could be, he said. He had that same weight in his face, like someone who thought things could change, until they didn't. I asked him what happened next. Screaming, not long, maybe a minute, then nothing, not even footsteps. No one came out? Not through the front, not through the back either. I checked because I needed to tell myself I did something. The guilt sat heavy on his chest. He didn't cry, he didn't shake. But his grip on that cane tightened like it was holding up more than just his knees. They left something in there, he said quietly. I used to hear things, weeks after, footsteps at night, doors creaking open, even after the building was empty. You ever report it? He laughed, bitter and dry. To who? The same people who had the key? I thanked him. He didn't say much more. Just stared at the spot where the building used to be like it still stood there in his memory. Men like Arturo don't lie, not at this age. Not when the ghosts they carry are louder than the ones we chase. Stanley didn't vanish, he was brought there. And whatever happened in that basement, it was meant to stay buried. I pulled the court records on a hunch. Protesters don't vanish over nothing, not in this city. When someone disappears in silence, it's usually because someone else is screaming with money on the other side. And sure enough, there it was. Filed August 15th, 1989. 6 weeks after the protest. Titled under an LLC no one had heard of, registered out of state, backed by a shell company tied to 3 real estate holdings in Manhattan and 1 silent investor. The language was clean, sanitized. Redevelopment acquisition for commercial use. But I knew the land. It used to be homes, a small cluster of low-income housing blocks that never made the skyline shots. The kind of place Stanley's group fought to protect. They didn't lose the fight. They were erased from it. The city sold the parcel for a fraction of its value. Transferred zoning rights through an emergency session that was never publicly announced. The approval was rushed, stamped, and slid through a side door. No minutes, no media, just a quiet signature in an office that closed for renovation the next week. By fall, the signs were up. Coming soon, East River Marketplace. I traced the LLC's filings backward. Buried 2 layers deep, I found a familiar name. Carradine Urban Holdings. Known for ghost bidding, fast flips, and a history of securing problematic properties through sudden resolutions. Their name had been tied to 3 other neighborhood fights, each ending with a protest, a vanishing figurehead, and a clean acquisition a few months later. Stanley's group had done more than protest. They'd filed injunctions, gathered signatures, appealed to the board. They were gaining traction, too much traction. And Stanley? He was the one putting his name on everything, the face they couldn't ignore anymore. I found one internal memo in the city zoning archive dated June 29, 1989. Subject: Interference concerns regarding parcel B45. In the margin, handwritten, SP is becoming a problem. Possible delay, monitor. No initials, no signature. Just the kind of note someone writes when they think no one will ever see it. But I saw it. And now I couldn't unsee what came next. The building Stanley died protesting was razed within 6 months. No historical preservation hearings, no tenant relocation records, just a demolition permit filed at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday and approved by noon. That's not how the city works unless someone's greasing it from the inside. Stanley wasn't silenced because he was loud. He was silenced because he was right. And the people who buried him didn't need him to be proven wrong. They just needed him to stop being in the way. This wasn't just a lost case. It was a land grab wrapped in blood and paperwork. And somewhere in that pile of signatures and sealed doors, someone signed Stanley Price's death sentence in ink that never fades. It was frame 23, half obscured, underexposed, blurred by motion and time. But once you know what to look for, you see it clear as day. The edge of the crowd, behind Stanley, behind the 2 men in plain clothes, there's someone else. A silhouette in the shadow of a telephone pole, arms crossed. Not moving, not chanting, watching. I zoomed in, enhanced, sharpened. The light caught his face for just a second, enough to see the cheekbone, the jawline, the set of the mouth, enough to run it through a facial recognition database built for cold case comparisons. And it hit. Norman Kell. 35 years ago, he was Brandt's partner, assigned to internal affairs, but always seemed more internal than affairs. His name had vanished from department records after 1991, scrubbed clean. No termination, no pension record, no mention of his badge being turned in. Just silence. But he was alive. The system found him. New name, new address. Living in a quiet town in upstate New York, the kind of place where people lock their doors but never worry why. He'd registered under the name Thomas Layton, ran a security consulting firm out of a rented office suite that hadn't updated its website in 8 years. He still looked the same. Older, yes, weathered. A little gray at the temples. But the eyes were the same. Cold, watchful. The kind of eyes that don't forget what they've done, just learn to blink slower. I pulled every scrap I could. He hadn't left much, paid his taxes, drove a car registered under the business name. No marriage, no public social media, a ghost with a face in a post office box. And the strangest thing, no one ever filed paperwork to discharge him from the NYPD. Not officially, not formally, which meant one of 2 things. Either he was removed so quietly the city couldn't admit it, or he was never really gone. There was one last note in the system, buried deep in an internal audit from '92. A single line in a larger document about unorthodox off-site intelligence assets. It didn't name him, but it described a man assigned to ongoing internal stability monitoring, inactive but not retired. They didn't fire Kell, they shelved him. And when you shelve someone like that, it's because they know too much, or did exactly what they were told. I looked back at the photo. Kell was watching Stanley, not reacting, not intervening, just cataloging, like a man who already knew what would happen and was only there to make sure it went the way it was supposed to. He wasn't there to stop a crime. He was there to witness a message. And now, all these years later, that message was still echoing. Because the man in the photograph, he never disappeared. He just stepped into the dark and waited for the world to forget he was ever part of it. The drive upstate was quiet, almost too quiet for what I was carrying. The tape, the photos, the badge, the box, they all felt heavier the closer I got to the edge of town. It was the kind of place with 2 diners and 1 gas station where everyone knows your face and no one asks why you left the city. A retirement town for the unwanted, or the dangerous. Kell's house sat at the end of a gravel road, tucked behind a curtain of dying trees. Modest but well kept, lawn trimmed, porch swept. A single chair faced the woods, not the driveway. Like he didn't care who came, only who didn't. I parked 2 houses down, walked slow, no rush. This wasn't the kind of visit you make with lights on and backup waiting. You knock once, and if the past answers, you listen. He opened the door before I could knock. Same eyes, sharper now somehow, as if age had cut away the mask instead of dulling the blade. He wore a sweater, house shoes, and the kind of stillness that says, "I'm not surprised to see you." "Detective," he said, like he was greeting an old friend instead of a ghost. I held up the photo. Stanley, Lasher's film, that final frame with Kell in the background. He looked at it. No change in his face, no flicker of memory, just a glance, a pause, and a smile that didn't quite reach the corners of his mouth. "You were there," I said. "I've been a lot of places," he replied. I pushed. "You worked with Eli Brandt, Internal Affairs, 1985 to 1991. You were at the 1989 protest. You saw Stanley Price. Maybe you followed him. Maybe you dragged him into that basement. Maybe you buried him twice, but you were there." He leaned against the doorframe like he was settling into a scene he'd played 100 times before. "You think you're the first one to come looking?" he asked. "You think his name didn't echo in the right ears for a few years after he vanished?" "Then why no answers?" I asked. "Why no justice?" He smiled again, a little wider now. Not cruel, just tired. "Because nothing ever disappears in this city, detective. Not really. Just the people who ask the wrong questions." There was a long pause, not a standoff, something older than that. Like 2 veterans of different wars meeting in a trench, neither of them dug. I waited for more, but Kell didn't offer it. He reached slowly for the door. "You drove all the way up here thinking I'd give you a clean ending," he said. "You should have stayed in the city, detective. That's where the silence lives." And then he closed the door. No slam, no lock, just finality. I stood there for a moment longer, listening for footsteps, for movement, for anything at all. There was nothing. He wasn't afraid of being exposed. Because people like Kell don't fear consequences. They fear being forgotten. And somehow, I think he knew. He never would be. I almost missed it. The last roll was different. Blurry, underexposed. No crowds, no faces, just paper. Pages shot in a rush, out of sequence, as if the photographer had run out of time and knew it. They weren't meant to be art. They were meant to survive. It started with city permits. Folded, half-torn, laid flat on what looked like a wooden desk, cheap, splintered. Maybe a basement table, maybe a safe house. I recognized the department headers, zoning approvals, construction timelines, environmental impact statements, stamped and signed in ink that bled under poor lighting. And the addresses? They matched the parcels Stanley fought to protect. On frame 7, a seal showed up. City of New York, Department of Buildings. stamped on a notice of emergency demolition, dated 2 weeks before the protest. It shouldn't have existed. That paper meant decisions were made before the rally even happened, before Stanley ever stepped onto that crate. In frame 10, a name was circled: Councilman R. Halberd, a man who'd publicly denied involvement, claimed ignorance in every hearing. His signature sat at the bottom of a fast-track approval stamped confidential. The same week, Stanley disappeared. Frame 14 was darker, slanted, maybe handheld. 2 IDs laid flat on a desk. One was Brant's. The other didn't have a name, just a face half lost to glare. But it was Kell, younger, wearing a grin that didn't belong in a badge photo. And then came the note. Frame 17. It wasn't typed. It wasn't staged. Just a torn piece of notebook paper, edges curled, taped to the corner of what looked like a locker. Written in shaky pen, "If they find me, tell her I tried." That was it. No name, no signature. But it didn't need one. The slant of the letters matched the writing from Stanley's old letters his sister had shown me. And the her? That was no mystery either. It was Janice, the only family he had left. The only person who kept his name alive after everyone else stopped saying it out loud. I stared at that note for a long time, not because it gave me an answer, but because it told me what kind of man Stanley was when the walls closed in. He didn't run. He documented. He left a trail not to escape, but to be followed. And the film, it wasn't just evidence. It was a message. He knew they were coming. He knew the system was folding around him. But even then, he chose to leave a map. Crude, fragmented, but honest. Because Stanley wasn't trying to be saved. He was trying to be heard. And 35 years later, someone finally was. That roll of film didn't just crack the silence. It whispered the last words of a man who refused to let the city erase him quietly. She opened the door slower this time. Not guarded, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from age, but from waiting too long for the truth to knock. I didn't say anything right away, just held out the envelope. Inside, 3 photos from the last roll. A copy of the demolition permit, a frame of Stanley's note, and a scan of the key, next to the badge. Artifacts from a life stolen in pieces. She took them like they were fragile, sat down on the edge of the couch and held the photo of his handwriting like it might dissolve if she blinked too hard. The silence stretched. Not awkward, sacred. Then her voice came. Small, even. I knew. She didn't look at me when she said it. Didn't have to. I knew it wasn't just a disappearance. I knew when the police stopped returning my calls, when the protest footage never aired, when the other organizers went quiet. She traced the edge of the note with one finger. That nameless, heart-wrung sentence. "If they find me, tell her I tried." I got a call 3 weeks after he vanished. No caller ID, just static on the line for a second, then a man's voice. Calm. Cold. He said, "You've asked enough. You don't want to be next." Then hung up. She folded the photo along the crease of the original paper, as if to shield it from the world. I called it in, filed a report. Nothing happened. No follow-up, no investigator. A week later, someone broke into my apartment. Took nothing. Just moved things. Turned his picture face down on my dresser. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. I stopped asking after that. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized no one was listening. Not the papers, not the cops, not the city. Stanley was erased, and I was next on the list. She looked up then. But I never stopped knowing, never stopped keeping his box on the shelf, never gave away his letters, never sold this place. I showed her the key. She nodded slowly. "I've seen that before," she said, "on his desk. He used to fidget with it when he thought no one was watching. Said it was the only lock in the world that opened the right kind of truth." "What kind of truth?" I asked. She smiled, just for a second. The kind people bury because they're afraid of what happens when it breathes again. She handed the photos back, but kept the copy of the note. I didn't stop her. "You're the first person who ever brought something real," she said. "Not hope, not questions. Something real." She stood up, walked to the shelf, picked up a weathered shoebox with duct tape on the lid and handed it to me. "Everything I never showed them," she said. Everything I held back because I knew it would vanish like the rest. I took it without a word. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a siren. Sometimes it walks in quietly, sits beside grief, and listens. And in that room, after 3 decades of silence, we both heard Stanley speak again. There won't be an arrest. I knew that before the report even hit my desk. Too old, too political, too far outside the bounds of what the department is willing to admit, let alone correct. No indictment, no charges, just a box of film, a cracked badge, and a name the city's already practiced forgetting. The building's set to be demolished next month. Official reason? Structural instability. Unsafe for public use. The real reason? It's a scar. A reminder. And the city doesn't like reminders. They prefer clean lines, new glass, luxury condos with fresh paint and no past. They'll pave it over, call it progress. Stanley Price won't get a plaque. No memorial. No coverage, not even a line in the papers. Just dust and silence and the occasional whisper if someone happens to ask the right-wrong question in the right-wrong bar. But the truth? It's here now. It's in the way the light hit that skeleton in the early morning, just enough to catch a jogger's eye. It's in the grain of a photograph pulled from a roll no one was supposed to develop. It's in a cracked floorboard and a cassette tape and a sister who waited 3 decades just to hear his voice one last time. Stanley never stopped trying. They came for him in the dark, but he left pieces of himself behind. Not just a body, not just evidence, but intention. The stubborn kind. The kind that survives even when the ink fades. And now he's part of this city's silence. Not erased, but etched. Deep. In places only the wind knows how to speak. I filed everything. Quietly. Stored the evidence where it won't get reassigned. Made copies of every photo, every letter, every damn permit. I can't take it to court, but I can make sure it doesn't disappear again. Because this city forgets fast, but it doesn't forget everything. It remembers in the way alleys echo at night, in the way old buildings lean against the sky like they're waiting for someone to ask the right question, in the names carved into benches, in the flowers left behind with no card, no note, just memory. The truth doesn't scream here. It doesn't shout. It just waits. Beneath the surface, under the paperwork, behind the closed doors and the half-closed mouths, and every once in a while, if you're quiet enough, it rises, just long enough to be seen, just long enough to remind you, justice may not always come with a gavel, but sometimes it shows up in a photograph no one meant to take, and that's enough. The sky was pale when I got there, not quite morning, not quite night. That hour where the city holds its breath and forgets to lie. Riverside Park was empty, just the rustle of leaves and the hiss of tires from a distant cab that didn't care what happened here. The spot was easy to find. Even after the cleanup, the soil didn't settle the same. Too soft, too dark, the kind of dirt that remembers what it held. I crouched down, pressed my hand into the earth. The wristwatch was gone. I'd cataloged it, photographed it, logged it in the report. But I hadn't kept it. Evidence has rules. But now, someone had come back. Someone who knew exactly where to dig. Maybe Kel. Maybe not. Maybe it didn't matter. Whoever it was, they wanted something left behind. I stood there for a long time. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just let the quiet fill the air between my ribs. Because this wasn't about prosecution anymore. It wasn't about press releases or justice served cold. It was about memory. Stanley's body was found. His words were heard. His story, a story they tried to erase, was pieced together, roll by roll, photo by photo, breath by broken breath. And in the end, he was still here. Not in the system, not in the headlines, but in the silence. That's the thing this city never admits. It doesn't bury its ghosts. It builds around them, covers them in scaffolding and fresh paint and newer crimes. But beneath it all, the voices remain, waiting, whispering, asking not to be saved but to be seen. I don't know who moved the watch. Maybe someone wanted to wear it again. Maybe it was a token, a reminder. Maybe it was Kel, tying off one last thread before he disappeared for good. Or maybe it was someone I'll never meet, someone who owed Stanley more than silence and finally came to pay a different kind of respect. But I didn't come to collect evidence. I came to remember. The trees overhead creaked like old joints. The river beyond the fence carried its same slow promise. and the wind moved through the grass like a whisper trying not to wake the dead. I didn't speak his name, didn't need to. He'd been silent for long enough. This place would remember him now, and me? I'd remember the way the city tried to forget, not with violence, but with stillness, the kind that buries the truth one layer at a time. The city of silence doesn't scream, it listens, it watches, and when it's ready, it exhales, one buried voice at a time.